Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon for our Pivot webinar. My name is Megan Maciel. I am the Innovation Marketing Manager here at Pivot. And on behalf of all of the employee owners at Pivot and Terracon, we want to welcome you. I am really excited about the topic of today's webinar, the cost of free data. We have our data subject matter expert Pete Veenstra with us today, who's going to talk us through what data looks like, how we cultivate it, how we manage it, and how we use it, and what it really means to have free data. Is it really free? So throughout the presentation, if you have any questions, please feel free and go ahead and put them in the chat. We will do our best to answer as many questions as we can at the end of the presentation. So as you're thinking about something, you can put it in the chat. We can address it later, or at the end, if you'd rather raise your hand and speak freely with Pete, we're also happy to do that. So I will go ahead and turn it over to Pete for our today's presentation, the cost of free data.
All right, awesome. Thanks, Megan. Welcome, everybody. Can you hear me okay? All right, awesome. Okay, so the cost of free data. We've been introduced, so I'm not going to focus on that, but I think not only being the Director of Data Architecture at Pivot, it's sort of my job to tell the story of data at Pivot. And that's what I'm going to do for you today. But as part of our culture here at Pivot and Terracon, we generally start all of our meetings with an incident injury-free moment. And if any of you attended the last webinar that I presented on, I used the same message. I think before it was like driving's dangerous, make sure you take breaks. I'll just say driving is one of the most dangerous things that we do. It must be done without distraction and focus. And just like in a hockey game, keep your head on a swivel and make no assumptions. You just never know what's going to happen out there, and everyone needs to be really safe. So take care of yourself when you're driving and focus on what you're doing, which is driving. All right, at the start of this webinar, when it was published, this assertion was thrown out there. In the age of information abundance, accessing free data seems like a boon for decision-making processes, especially in industries like energy and renewables. Gathering data from multiple sources may seem like a straightforward task, but in reality is far more complex. From the initial research of required data to sources to the highly specific process of normalization and data sharing, each step incurs significant time and effort. Moreover, the transient nature of data makes its constant update a necessity, further adding to the cumulative costs. So I'm going to talk about this and this assertion and present some thoughts on, is free data really free? And if you grab it and use it, can you trust it in the long run? And do you have the resources present to maintain that kind of operation? So in a previous life, I was in the software world, and we always used to say software development is like a three-legged stool, time, quality, and money. Pick two. I think in data, it really comes down to all three, right? When you compile a database for use, whether it be a simple one or a complex one, you're going to have to take the time to research the data that you use, acquire it, standardize it, and come up with some way to maintain it. And you're constantly asking yourself about the quality of this data. Is it always available? Is it the most up to date? Can the agency that you got this data from be trusted? Do you value their opinion when they put a data set out? Is the data appropriate and useful for what you want to do? And lastly, is it documented? If you ask anyone on my team, I'm very big on documentation. It's like leave a breadcrumb for the next person. But when it comes to data, especially data where you make decisions, you need to be able to document that data and say, I know exactly where I got it from, and I know exactly when I got it, and this is why I got it. Again, I always coach my data folks on the who, what, when, where, why, how, with anything to do with data. And that really is the basis of how we document our stuff. And what does it cost? Free data is free data. If you have a web browser, you can go grab data from an immense variety of sources. But once you download it, you've got a snapshot of that data. How do you maintain it? Do you every month go get that data set? What happens if you have 100 data sets and it takes you a day to get each data set? There's not 100 days in a month, so that means you have to get more people. So the cost of getting the free data actually incurs something. And really, when you're not keeping that data up to date, are you prepared to deal with the cost of failure due to a bad decision or not being first to market or not having the most up-to-date information possible? Data is obviously important, right? Data affects your decision making. You can't have any information unless you have data at your fingertips. If you don't have information, you just have no knowledge or understanding or insights. And if you don't have those understanding or insights, you're not going to be able to have what this data triangle says is wisdom, but I think really say you can't make a decision or you can't make the best decision and you can't make it quickly. Everything in every conference and every software presentation now is talking about AI, but the basis for that is data. And what we do at Pivot may not have a huge amount of AI in it, but it is certainly data driven. So you're going to run into bad data all the time, and then you're going to have to ask yourself, did we make a decision because of this bad data? Or is this data up to date? Do we know where it came from? Like, you don't need a large language model or AI or machine learning to hallucinate to prove that you've got bad data. One of the best conference swag I ever saw was this cloth bag saying, "My ungoverned large language model thinks this is a t-shirt." I saw that. I ran over to the vendor and I said, "I need to have that. That is awesome." Because take rid of the AI part of it and just say, "My ungoverned database thinks that this is a whatever." So it's important to have good data. However, no data is perfect, but like in an AI model, some data are better and useful than others. What makes good data? Simply, it's fit for your purpose. In our case, it's got a spatial component to it. And when I say our case, that's Pivot. It's properly formed, both semantically and syntactically. It makes sense and the machine can read it and it can display it in the environment that you choose. It comes from a trusted agency. I understand the provenance of this data. Where did it come from? And it's always up to date. I have the best of this data. I have the highest pedigree of this data. And data that is really good, able to show its provenance and pedigree on demand. But data is free, you say. Well, like my dad always used to say to me, you always get what you pay for, right? Free data, here it is. Go to the site, you download it, you add it somewhere, you create some access to it, you use it in a map, and you finish with the project, and then you go back and repeat it again at a project level. And eventually, with the amount of data that is required to make decisions, this becomes untenable. If you only require 2 data sources, then this is a great model for you. But if you start requiring 100 data sources or 50 data sources, unless you have the organization infrastructure to support it, becomes rapidly untenable. And this is a project mentality. So I use the fast food analogy here because it's quick, it's easy. I roughly know what I'm going to get, but I always have that line of Joe Pesci in that movie, where you never trust the drive-through because you never really know what you're going to get. Or you go to the grocery store and you say, okay, I got a list. This is what I want. It's always going to be there. It's repeatable and I know where to find it. So it's really a project versus product mentality when it comes to the idea of, oh, I can get this data for free. Sure, you can. No problem. I totally agree with you. But can you use it over and over again? And how often do you have to update it? So I'm going to describe very quickly the pivot data process just to show that it is a process, but I'm also going to talk about the different steps in this process and how each of them generates a documentable artifact. So we're either rechecking to go get a new version of data or we're going out and building a new data set. In the latter case, we have to prioritize which ones we do. Often it's driven by client need. Sometimes it's driven by the application adds a new part of functionality that requires it. But you get the need. Like if a client wants this, that's important to us. We're a software company. We sell subscriptions. So client needs are very important. They drive what we do, and we want to make sure that they're happy. But it has to work for them. It has to solve their need. Then we go source the data and find the agency and we download it and we create what's known as a loader template so we can take it out of shapefile format or KMZ format or GeoJSON format or whatever format and put it into something that our system understands. But we also keep that source data in our system. How many times have you gone out to a web service or a geodatabase download only to find that the link is broken or it has been changed and you have to go hunt for that? So we always grab the data. Joking aside, a lot of the data comes from the federal government. The federal government on a monthly basis is somewhat struggling with the ability to maintain the budget. And not all these websites are always going to be funded. We have run into instances where we know the data is always there, and then all of a sudden there's a shutdown and the data wasn't there. So storing the source data and having it on-prem is certainly advantageous to us to provide continuity. And as data people, we want to be able to provide continuity to our consumers who use our data. We curate for metadata. That's about what agency, when did I get it, when was it last updated, when did I last download it, when's the last time I checked it. That's the provenance and pedigree part. And we then use FME from Safe Software to load it into our database, and the FME workbench gets archived and is added to the metadata so we know exactly how the transformation happened to the data, if anything. We configure how this data will look, and we save that configure. We do it in a spreadsheet because it's very easy to edit. We can share it through SharePoint and OneDrive, and people can add their comments. And when we feel like we've got it, we put the data into our bronze environment, which we call test. And you can see that all of a sudden there's a whole bunch more artifacts that happen. We have a GeoServer SDL, which shows how that data is going to be rendered on a map. We have some search views, which allow us to search through that data super, super fast. We have materialized views, which allow us to keep the last 3 loads of that data into the system. If we get to production and find that the data, for some reason, just something happened that missed all these tests, we can immediately roll it back. We then configure our application to view our data. We put it into stage, it gets tested again, it gets put into the platform, and that is documented. And then finally, we release it, creating a change log, sales package, and most importantly for our end users, a data dictionary. Now you may think, we don't do all of that stuff, but Pivvot does. This is how we roll with data. And this is why we take the data and our clients know that it's going to be reusable, available, repeatable, documented every single time. And then every federal data set we check every 30 days, every state data set we check every 90 days, and some of the other data sets we only check every 180 days because we have history of when they're typically updated. So we know that we're checking in an optimized fashion, and this all comes back down to how we store metadata about our data. And this is the data that you get from the Pivvot platform, and it's growing. In another 6 weeks, there's going to be a bunch more data elements added to this list. We're constantly doing that, and we can do that because we have a system of we take this data and we curate it into our system and do this explicitly. So federal data is great, right? You get one data set for the whole entire United States, right? Loaded into the Pivvot database. It's fantastic. We're starting to take data sets now from the state agencies and use them to enhance the federal. And the really cool thing about it is you can get data at a certain scale from federal government or an agency, and at the state agencies you get a lot more detailed data. And not only do you get sometimes the same kind of data, in this case polygon data, but the yellow lines and the pink points actually show linear and point geometry describing the features. So just getting a federal data set is fine, but often it's very, very crude. It's at a scale that may not be conducive to the analysis you want. So being able to do this at the state level and still bring it in and use it and integrate it with the federal data is becoming a super effective way for us to look at these data sets. And as you know, the order of magnitude of one data source to 50 data sources or more. So what's the true cost of data? Free data, you have to go find it. You have to prove that the geometry is right. Anybody here know about the right-hand digitizing rule? If you take a polygon and you walk along the outside of that polygon with your right hand, it's digitized in a way that ESRI will read it. But if someone digitizes its left-hand direction with your left hand touching the outer boundary of it, ESRI tool will not read that geometry. And that's one of 14 different QA/QC tests that we use, right? We make sure they're in the right hemisphere. That little tricky minus sign on your decimal degrees can really play havoc with where your data shows up. Self-intersections, vertices at the same spot, too many vertices to render in a web environment. attributes with absolutely nonsensical names or missing values, or in the case of the federal versus state, do I grab the one career data set or go get something finer and check all these different agencies for that? Then you need to have GIS expertise and data expertise to bring the data in. That's a no-brainer, but it's worth pointing out that that costs something for an organization to pull that in. Then where do you host the data? Do you need to provide security to it? Can you present it easily to people through access? Not all web map environments are the same. How do you test it and deploy it? Do you have redundancy in place in case that data set is no longer available? We've always got the last 3 loads and the last 3 sets of source data in case we have to roll back our data for whatever reason, or actually display it because the source agency is shut down. And that makes our data always available. Can you guarantee that? And you may think that's not what our organization does. But I think if you look down to it, when it comes down to how the vice president of data management or enterprise GIS looks at it, I think they're thinking these things and they want to have this. If you bring data in, they've got some guarantee that it's going to be available and easily findable without an expert who now just went on a surfing vacation in Hawaii and only knows where all this data is stored. From our standpoint, having a subject matter expert that really understands the data and is willing to sit and engage with you is another cost because you have to coordinate them. They're usually highly valuable people with busy schedules, and you need to verify that what the data you're doing is what's needed. And then documentation. Maybe this is my pet peeve or my thing that I would fight to the last man on. But if you don't know where that data came from, and if you don't have some sort of redundancy or dictionary and identification of any kind of transformation that you did to that data that's documentable and repeatable, somebody could turn around and ask you that question and say, can you prove this? And in our case, we can, because this is what we do. We're helping people make decisions with data, and we want to be able to have this information at their disposal. So is this a question of the cost of data versus the cost of an analyst? I mean, what's the average cost of an analyst? Whatever the base salary of an analyst is to do this work. I did a little bit of research, and the U.S. Small Business Administration says, hey, if you're a business owner and you're going to hire somebody, be prepared to pay 1.35 what you're telling them their salary is. But I don't think that's really, the full picture of it. And it certainly casts this idea of, I have GIS analysts, what do I need this data for? Right now, finding good people to do data work is getting tough. I mean, everybody I talk to is saying we're either cutting people down and we need to find ways to improve our processes, or just finding people to do the job right is super hard. And as a mentor and a manager and a leader of people, you want to make sure you're spending time on those folks to get them trained up and expert to be able to understand all of the processes and not just check boxes. And then, this isn't really about a person, it's about a process. Is this a repeatable process? Is the data ever fresh? Is the data repeatable and secured? And can it be documented? Again, that document thing. So I think it's a bit of an apples versus orange comparison. There might be some similarities. I have people, I can use the free data, but I think there's probably more cost there than you would initially assume. So where you as an organization gets the best value from data? It's really super interesting, right? What's the best use of your analyst's time? How fast can results be produced by those analysts? Is the data that they're doing secure and always available to you? And is that process repeatable? I show this from Crowdfire and Atacama. Atacama is a big metadata vendor. I showed this really interesting graphic here saying, what do data scientists spend most time doing? I think you could scratch out data scientists and maybe put GIS analysts there, GIS, data analysts. What do they spend most of their time doing? And since AI is a big thing, it's probably appropriate to show this graphic. But the point is if you look at the 60% and the 90%, cleaning and organizing data and collecting data sets, none of the building a training set or refining an algorithm or actually doing the work mining the data for patterns or doing other cool analysis. That's what people spend the least time, but I would argue that that's what's the highest value. So, going and managing your own data sets, you're going to make a cost for finding that data and putting it into a format that your analysts, regardless of who they are and what they're doing, can use to get results. You also see these really cool diagrams about all the things about data quality, and all of them are super important, right? Data used for AI and ML needs to be really good data. Otherwise, you have hallucinations, or you just can't find or even discover accidentally the patterns you're looking for. But I would argue that the simple metric for data is it available? Is it up to date? Can you trust the agency? Is that data appropriate and useful? And is it documented so that if said analyst who likes to surf goes on vacation again, you know where to find it and how to get access to it and how it was transformed? And really, there's a cost of failure, right? You always get what you pay for. It's just an adage. And, are you willing to pay the price for a bad decision? Some people are. That's fine. But, in the renewables and infrastructure world, decisions need to be made quickly with the best data possible. So do you want your analysts doing analyst work, or do you want them hunting and gathering data? From our perspective, we like doing the data work, right? Leave the data part to us. So in review, we talked about our data process, and the reason for doing that is to say, yes, the data is free, but it needs to be put into a format that can be used. I doubt that an analyst grabs any kind of data and does not have to do any kind of work to get it into some semblance of a usable format. We talked about just in general, what are the expenditures for hosting data across the board and serving it out to your client base. And that really gives you a better idea of the true cost of what it takes to manage data. And, some idea around quality. You can go grab whatever data you want, but if it's not fit for the purpose you need, and you don't have the most up-to-date data, you're starting to make decisions being less informed than you probably should be. So I'm going to turn it back over to Megan if there are any questions, but I really want to say thank you to everybody for listening on my thoughts on the true cost of free data. And the bottom line there is we're happy to meet with you. We're happy to sit down and talk to you about your data needs or potential uses for our data or your data. Even if you have any questions to say, hey, we're doing it this way, we're glad to share our best practices in terms of how we manage data and things like that. So Megan, I will stop sharing my screen and pass it back to you. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Pete. That was so helpful and so interesting. I love it. I think data can feel kind of complicated sometimes, and I think you explained it in a really accessible way. So thank you. At this time, I'd invite anyone, if you'd like to go ahead and put a question in the chat, feel free to do that. Or you can click the raise hand feature at the top of your screen and I can unmute you and you can ask your question verbally if you would feel better about that. And as always, as Pete said, if you think of a question afterwards today, you're always welcome to reach out to Pete or myself. We'd love to talk with you about your data needs, how Pivvot might be able to support you, or how we can work together to make sure we're maximizing data. If anybody has any questions, they can put them in the chat now. All right, I'll go ahead and unmute you. Just one second. All right. Okay. See, Vash, I don't want to mispronounce your name. I think I might be mispronouncing it, but you're welcome to unmute yourself now and you can ask your question.
Yeah, I'm Siavash. Thank you for the presentation, Peter. I appreciate that. I have a question. So many of these like free data, there are restrictions on acquiring the data. For instance, I know that the pipeline data, you can go in the NPLM and visually see the pipeline, but there are restrictions to get the data directly into into your software or program. How do you deal with that? Are all those public data available that your software engineer can get access to that and integrate them in your system, or you also deal with that as well? Probably many other platforms, you would be just visually able to see the data, but actually acquiring that data and integrating that into your system, there might be restrictions for that.
Yeah, thanks for your question. That's a really good question. Free data is free data, and sometimes there's restrictions on it. There is data that is available for viewing for free through the organizations or agencies' websites, but you can't download it. So I'm talking about data that you can generally, as a GIS mapping professional, go and get and download. And we're constantly told by people, well, we can go do that ourselves. And I'm like, okay, now have at it. Our pipeline data, the Energy Infrastructure Administration offers pipeline data, but we actually purchase it from a vendor. Okay, so that data is not free. It's not free to us. And of course, that cost is passed on through our subscription. But there are a lot of people in our industries, the companies that subscribe, that want to see that data. So we pay for that data and have it in our system. And clients of our system are able to visualize it. They're able to do their analysis with it, and they're able to download portions of that data into whatever format we provide. There are some restrictions. Not all data is free, right? That's an assertion, and probably a good one that we might have just put there and just said, sometimes you have to pay for the data, right? Not all data is free. But the same problems apply even to data that you pay for. You have to manage it, okay, in your system. So thanks. Did that answer your question?
Yes, yeah, thank you.
Yep. And we need to send this gentleman a Pivvot water bottle, because I think he's the first person in the last 3 webinars that I've done has actually asked a question.
I will get that headed to you.
Yeah.
That would be great. Thanks.
Yeah. Anyone else have any other questions before we hop off? Okay,
So
Stephanie has one. Oh, sorry. Yeah, go ahead, Siavash, and then we'll get to you, Stephanie.
You haven't done any kind of analysis to probably get access to just visually available data?
We do have we have the capability in our platform to present web services that other people do. That's only visual. So if you really wanted to pull in NextRad radar into your analysis for whatever, we can show that in our platform. That opens up an interesting can of fish, right? How do you have complete access to that all the time, right? And it's not vector data. Our platform uses vector data as a basis for its analysis. So we do have the ability to support that in our platform, but it's only going to be a visual representation of data, because NextRad, weather's always changing. But even contours and elevation, we generate that from our digital elevation models that we store in the LiDAR data we can download. But storing that, maintaining it, and duplicating is a huge cost, right? And I didn't even talk about that in this presentation, but it's an enormous cost in terms of database servers and things like that. So,
got it. Thank you.
Not a problem. There's a question in the chat from Stephanie. My clients have expressed the desire to not be limited to paying large sums of money to consultants to develop proprietary software platforms. Are you aware of open source platforms that can be tailored, developed to meet the needs of the clients and owned by the client? There's an initiative out there called Open Layers. OpenStreetMap provides a ton of data that is free, right? Again, you're limited to the servers that are available to you and downloaded. Pivvot does charge a subscription for its data, but we not only distribute it through our platform for use in our environment, so our map tablet and things like that, our map display, but we also have an API that allows you to consume that data not only through WMS, but through GeoJSON. You click on the map at this point and return the features and attributes. It is subscription, but for clients that want to build their own thing and then consume data, the API is available. And again, it comes down to, you sort of get what you pay for. Open Layers is super, super cool. And if I was doing a college research project or something like that, I'd be totally okay with using that. If I was slaving an enterprise business system where I had workflows that had dollar amount to the outcome of those decisions, I think I would be okay with investing some money in a data source I know was there, reliable, and useful to me. So it's a cost balance thing. But Pivvot gives you a subscription to our platform, makes it really super easy for you to use it, but it also provides an API to the data should you need to use it in that format. And we have a software license agreement that supports how up-to-date and regularly updated our data is. So
Thanks so
I hope-
much, Pete.
All right.
All right. Any other questions before we wrap it up tonight? All right. Well, again, if you think of something later, tomorrow, next week, feel free to reach out to Peter. We're always available, and we would welcome the opportunity to chat with you, learn more about your data needs. And we really appreciate you taking some time out of very busy schedules this afternoon to be on with us live. We will be sending out the recording here probably in the next few days. So if you have any colleagues or friends that you think might also want to view this presentation, please feel free to forward it on. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much, Pete, and we hope you have a great day. Take care, everyone.